seasoned, and we can't respond just on gut feelings. But Detective Sergeant Kaufman, in reviewing the burglary, just felt something wasn't right, and it's part of the reason he had Ms. Hall come back in, just a follow-up interview. Well, Reinhart inserted himself in the investigation for no obvious reason. He had concerns that it was going to impact his job. Well, when you rationalize that, many police officers have some marital problems. That in and of itself doesn't negatively impact on your job. The fact that your spouse moves out, that really doesn't impact on your job. The fact that your spouse has a burglary doesn't impact on the job. And most cops really want bad guys put away, so why would you want an investigation to stop when a burglary occurred, somebody kicked in the door and stole your wife's jewelry? So that really, I think, was a key turning point. The pieces just didn't add up. But the length of the investigation, certainly, we want to do a thorough investigation. It seems like today everybody wants to rush to judgment. That's the last thing we want to do. We want to have a solid case, and yesterday morning we had that solid case, and we're prepared to try to sit down with Mr. Reinhart and go through the case with him and give him the opportunity to discuss his side. We had two different plans that we tried. Neither of them worked. We wanted to try to get him to a neutral location, and really the last option that we had was to implement the Cumberland County SRT and go that route. That was not our first option.
Can you go through the options just real quick?
Pardon me?
You kind of like both had mentioned. Can you go through the three options as?
I can, but I'm not going to. We had two different methods that we tried to utilize to get him to a neutral location, and both of them failed. And the last option we had, there was a viable option. Our number one goal, we didn't want anybody to get hurt, including Mr. Reinhart. And we took every possible step to contain the incident, keep it in a neutral location, and serve the warrants on him so that nobody got hurt. And our third option, when the first two failed, was to implement the SRT, and then unfortunately he made the final decision.
Was anyone else in the house with him?
No.
He used his authority on the job to look up things. Are those things typically tracked? Does somebody watch what an officer is looking at, or I'm just curious?
They're not tracked, but that information is available. So police officers, you know, the databases that they query, that information can be obtained. Oftentimes it is for the simple purpose of auditing whether those databases are being used correctly. Because what we deal with in law enforcement every day is often protected criminal history record information. It's actually an incredibly complicated area of the law. You know, what is protected, what is not. And you'll have from time to time, I mean, I have to audit it in my office. You know, Ed Marsico has to audit it in his office. Tom Kearney in his office, because we have to make sure that the people in our office that have access to the databases are appropriately using those. So I can tell you, we've certainly had situations before where people, both in law enforcement and civilians that work with law enforcement, have improperly accessed databases. Sometimes that's criminal, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's just a violation, but for police departments and law enforcement entities, it can put in jeopardy their access to the databases if people are using it inappropriately. So is it actively tracked? No. But obviously we can obtain that information when we need to, and that's an important part of this case.
How do you make people in the public, I mean, conspiracy theorists to sit there and say, well, you know, how does this not happen to me? You know, like, how do you make people feel comfortable with the people in law enforcement that they're using these tools correctly and that this type of thing doesn't happen?
That's a good question. Obviously, the law enforcement officers swear an oath. You know, we were just speaking about this before we came in. In the last few years, thankfully, it seems to have calmed down, but we've had a run of cases in Cumberland County of teachers getting in trouble. That doesn't mean teachers as a class or a group that we need to be suspicious of. It's just we had a bad run, and we had some big school districts where if you have a certain number of employees, these things are going to happen. So as far as the public is concerned, I would say that the incidents and issues we have with police officers are thankfully few and far between. And I would hope that when the public sees the hard work that was put in and the cooperation, the unquestioning cooperation that was provided by other law enforcement agencies, I would hope that they can take some comfort in that. You know, clearly this is a very difficult time in our society to not only be in law enforcement, but in particular to be a police officer. And it is incumbent upon all of us, and especially the sworn police officers, to make sure that they are doing everything right and doing everything by the book. People are going to go off the rails, unfortunately. It happens. And in this case, it's a shame that it ended the way that it did, but I am thankful that nobody else was hurt.
Speaking of going off the rails, was there any evidence that Officer Reinhart was despondent, or that he knew how strong your case was becoming and that he was becoming desperate?
Again, very good question. Based on what we learned in our investigation, he was clearly having some issues in his personal life. There's nothing in our investigation to indicate that he was taking those problems to work. We haven't heard that from his fellow police officers. Certainly haven't heard that from our colleagues in the Dauphin County DA's office who we had to work with in this case. I spoke to a defense attorney this morning before I came here who was asking me about the case and said that she had not seen any indication of it. Doesn't mean that he didn't confide in people or that other people didn't know, but it wasn't anything that we had become aware of during the course of this investigation.
Free?
Yeah.
Did the officer leave a note, or at this point, if he did not, do you folks have an idea why he took his own life?
I don't believe there's a note, but we're still going through the evidence that we discovered in the house, so I really don't want to speculate. Certainly, I don't believe it would be, but I'm going to, even though I don't want to. I can tell you from my perspective, when someone is in a situation that Reinhart was in and is confronted with the level of evidence against him, that's got to be incredibly difficult. And we've seen similar situations in the past, and someone who's been involved in law enforcement, I think, is in a much better position to evaluate the quality of the evidence against him. So that could have something to do with it. It also could be other life circumstances or something that we don't know about at all. But obviously the fact that we had this substantial amount of evidence, that's a reason that Chief Adams and his group were so cautious about how they were going to try to take Mr. Reinhart into custody.
So they actually thought he was going to potentially kill him?
I won't say that, but certainly the experience in this department, which is substantial, knew that it was a potentially volatile situation. And I'm thinking back to a police officer that we arrested. It's a lot of years ago now in Cumberland County, and Lieutenant McLaughlin was in the back of the room, was involved with that case. And even that night, that case wasn't quite as wrapped up as this case was. But we knew that night. I think any time you're going to arrest somebody with military or law enforcement experience, it's a potentially volatile situation.
Was there any communication between Reinhart and anybody yesterday? Was there any exchange at all?
Yeah, the special response team negotiator was able to establish some communication with him. Obviously, it didn't work out the way that we would hope.
Did he know the depth of? Yeah, because you said you hadn't met with him yet. You were trying to get him neutral. So did he know the depth, or do you think he knew? Obviously,
I don't know that he knew everything that we had. Certainly, he knew what he did.
Did his estranged wife have any type of like a PFA or anything else?
She did not. I don't know. I don't believe we uncovered any evidence that there was any harassing or threatening behavior. Obviously, from this affidavit, you can see that there was certainly some attempted manipulation, but I don't believe there was a PFA.
Can I say a few
Sure,
words?
Chief.
I don't have anything prepared. I just want to ask that you honor and understand the shock that my officers are going through right now. I want to thank Upper Allen Township Police Department, Chief Adams, for their absolute professionalism through this investigation, and this incident, and to answer one of the questions, I was essentially, to use a phrase, kept in the dark, and I think that was the right thing to do, and I support that. And I didn't know till yesterday morning the charges for the sergeant. And I respect and admire the Upper Allen Township Police Department for the way that they've conducted this investigation. We're in shock. He was a 17-year veteran. He was one of the first officers I hired as a new chief in 1998. And I will say this, on duty, when he was on duty, he was a solid professional. And there was no indications of some of the unbelievable things that you've heard here today. There's nothing for me to say to excuse this criminal conduct. My challenge now is to get my officers through this. He was a man that they admired, and he worked hard, but I'm going to tell all of you this. I've been a police officer for 32 years. I've seen and done a lot of bad things. Yesterday was the most horrific and horrible day of my career, and there are times that we walk around people that we just don't know the darkness in their heart. And I think that was the case here. And again, I can't say enough about the professionalism of the Upper Allen Township Police Department and the way things were handled and investigated. And as far as the trust factor that the one gentleman asked, I think the only thing that you can derive from this and take away from this as it relates to our profession is we're always going to hire from the human race. And it's a tough profession, and I make no excuses for this conduct. But here's what you can trust, that these professional officers here continue that investigation in a very confidential manner, knowing he was a police officer, and pursued that investigation with vigor and professionalism. And that's what you can take away as trust today. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thanks.
I'll have copies of the arrest warrant and affidavit of probable cause for you in a second.